We've been receiving a lot of questions recently about how to scope your environment, specifically for PCI DSS version 4. In this video, we will answer those questions for you. Hello, I'm Matt Crane. I'm a manager here at Schellman in the PCI practice. Today, we're going to give you an overview of how scoping works within PCI DSS, specifically looking at the new version of standard, PCI DSS version 4. As you can see here on the diagram, there's three categories that we're looking at when we're talking about systems that are in scope for PCI DSS. The first thing that you need to do to identify the scope of your environment, find your systems or to identify your systems that store, process, or transmit cardholder data. Very rarely do we have any disputes about whether or not a system that performs one of these functions should be in scope or not. It's a pretty clear-cut answer. The other portion that's in the box is systems that are directly connected to or on the same network segment as a system that stores, processes, or transmits cardholder data. This seems to be pretty simple to identify, and for most organizations to wrap their head around, that if I have a system that's on the same network segment as a system that stores, processes, or transmits, we need to include that in our PCI assessment because it affects the security of cardholder data. Right? Some examples of this: you have a web server that's serving up pages that may not be taking payments, but it's on the same network segment as a separate web server that is serving up a payments page. Or it could be connecting to a database server that is also being used by a different web server that stores cardholder data. The next one is where we get into the weeds of things and where a lot more ambiguity comes out around scoping. Where we talk about systems that impact the security of or connected to is kind of the colloquial term for systems that fall into these categories. Some examples here would be if you have a SIEM or a log aggregation server that's in a separate network environment, and it's in a separate environment because you're using it for other non-PCI systems. It's aggregating logs from multiple sources, so you don't want to keep it in your CDE, you want to keep it in a management network segment or something like that. That system would still be in scope. The next example would be like an Active Directory, domain controller, or a patch management system. These are systems that are actively making connections into your credit card data environment, and those would be, again, considered to be in scope for a PCI assessment. Now that we have a couple of examples, I get a lot of questions about, okay, how do we identify other systems, right? We understand that a log management server or that a domain controller should be in our scope, but what about the rest of our systems? So the simplest answer there is, if you have a system that is being used to meet a PCI requirement, then that system is going to be in scope, right? So if you have an antivirus management server or a McAfee EPO server or something to that effect, it is facilitating a PCI requirement being in place on a system that is in your CDE, and therefore we need to validate various requirements around that. One of the last kind of simple paths forward to identifying additional systems that should be included in scope are systems that provide segmentation controls or anything to that effect. So if you have a firewall that's segmenting your CDE, obviously that firewall needs to be included in scope. So now that we have a general understanding of how scoping works within PCI DSS, let's take a deeper look at the new requirement within PCI DSS version 4. So this is requirement 12.5, and within this, organizations are going to be required to validate their scope on an annual basis. Right? After March 31st, 2025, service providers will need to do this biannually. One of the most effective ways that some of my current clients go about this is they use the classifications that you see here on the diagram to classify and mark systems in their inventory. So anything that stores, processes, or transmits cardholder data, I have clients that will label it with a number 1 or a letter A or some other type of nomenclature to identify that, and then they kind of move their way down the list. So if it stores, processes, transmits, or is on the same network segment, that's part of our CDE, we need to label it as such. And then they can move on to those supporting connected to or security impacting systems and add either a 2 or a B or some other type of labeling methodology. So that way they can keep track of things consistently. And what that allows them to do is they can provide the inventory to their assessor as part of their new assessment, and then it makes the review of that a lot simpler because they've already gone through that exercise. Now those clients that have been doing this already for PCI DSS version 3.2.1, they're really ahead of the game for this new requirement, which is 12.5, the new version of standard. The only additional thing they'll need to do is start making sure that they identify any external connections, ensure that they ID any application data flows. This could include data flow diagrams that you've already been required to do as well. Now that I've gone through how scoping works in PCI DSS and the new requirements in version 4 of the standard, I'm sure you have questions for us. We have answers. Fill out the form on our website and we'll get back to you.